sitting here today with Joey Tan. He's a knowledge translation expert from the University of Alberta. He's been working with a really unique team here on campus. It's called the Peer Team, and he has graduated from the University of Alberta in 2013, and in 2015 he received his PharmD. So we're really honored to have Joey here with us. Thank you so much for being here, Joey.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sandy.
Yeah, so I guess to start us off, for some of our audience who might not be familiar with knowledge translation,
Okay.
could you maybe tell us a little bit more about what that kind of looks like?
Okay, so the easiest way to put things is, so knowledge translation is how you get education, kind of how do you dispel that or give that out to a particular audience. It can mean a lot of things to many people, and that's why it's hard to define it. Generally, with knowledge translation, an easy one to kind of understand is that if I create some sort of guidelines, how do I get the message I'm getting across in the guidelines out to the public, healthcare practitioners, and students, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think for, to the for the student or for someone who might not be in the healthcare field, it's almost serves as a bridge of taking what the research and evidence says and bridging it into more applicable, if you will, applicable guidelines that physicians and other healthcare providers can use. Does that sort of touch on what your work is like?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Okay, very nice. So in terms of, I know that you graduated from the U of A, and I know that you've been really involved in a lot of the research and then the knowledge translation aspects. What were you like as a student here at the U of A?
So pretty funny. I wasn't the greatest student. I probably sat in the back of the class a lot of the time, and in terms of marks wise, I think people expect me to have like the highest marks because of where I am, but I didn't. I was more focused on extracurriculars, getting to know my class, kind of having fun, because back then I think a lot of the advice I got from older people was like, enjoy your time in school. And unfortunately, it's not the best advice, that maybe you should still care about school. It's not like I didn't care about school, but maybe don't be so stressed about getting the highest marks.
Yeah, that's really good advice for some of our listeners who may be students, and especially speaking from my perspective as a second year, the course load is fairly heavy with our curriculum right now, and so yeah, I think that's a great kind of take-home message to really get a full experience within pharmacy, whether that be part of joining some organizations such as APSA, which I know that you were perhaps part of during your time here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I did a lot of work, especially, I'm trying to think now, I think social rep a couple times, but like VP external, which led into Mr. Pharmacy at that time. That's kind of one of the big things I did was bring Mr. Pharmacy from, I don't know if you guys know, but back then it was in Lister Hall. I think it was 150 people maximum, and now we brought that over to the Meyer Horowitz. And now, I don't know, it's a pretty big event nowadays.
Yeah,
so we're here, yeah.
And even students from other faculties are also starting to take part, and
that's awesome.
It's actually happening for us next week.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
Exciting.
Awesome.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing, the earlier parts of your journey in pharmacy with us. So when you were in school, did you know what you wanted to do when you graduated?
I think, yeah, so this is the thing. I think a lot of people expect for me to say like, no, I don't know what I always wanted to do, but actually, I think as early on in school, I kind of thought like, oh, maybe community pharmacy would be where I'd be. And I think there's two boats back then, from my friends at least, and who I talked to. It was either community pharmacy or hospital, right? Probably similar things than what people think nowadays. But I don't know. I thought community pharmacy was my thing, and I kept thinking that until I graduated, until I started doing it. And that's kind of when I realized community pharmacy is great. Not that's bad or anything, but depending on what community pharmacy you're at, there's always different opportunities, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So are you currently working at a community level, or have you kind of drifted away from that?
Yeah, so after the community pharmacy bit, so after I graduated, I worked 1 year doing relief in community pharmacy, right? Then did my PharmD, and after the PharmD, I went to a PCN. So people still consider that community pharmacy because it's not necessarily the hospital. Maybe more specialty in that it's a clinic and it's not a pharmacy, but I'd still consider it a community. Anyways, from there, I kind of realized it was mainly the opportunities in terms of like the patients you kind of see in community, and the PCN practice. Certain pharmacies, for those of you who don't know, see certain populations. And depending on the pharmacy you're at, you're going to see different things, and you're going to specialize in different things depending on what you see. What you realize is after a year or so, you kind of feel like you don't know enough, even though you've graduated from school and you've kind of learned a lot in 4 years. So I kind of hit a point where it wasn't necessarily a board or anything with community pharmacy. It was a point where I thought I didn't know enough to do a good job. So that's why I went back to do a PharmD to see, maybe is there something else I need to know before I can treat my patients better. And then after that, I landed the PCN job. But then currently, I still work at a Costco pharmacy because I think it's still relevant to stay involved. Yeah.
Absolutely. And just for some of the audience members who might not be familiar with the PCN
Right.
could you elaborate a little bit more about what your role was there in that team?
Yeah, so the primary care network, the easiest way to put it is the government gives money to individual family physicians. It's kind of like a per patient on their panel is what they call it. So who the physician cares for, and they get I don't know what it is, but maybe $2 or $3, let's say, per person. But so what people do is they bring people together. So instead of 2 physicians pooling their money, they pull in 20 physicians. You get more for your dollar because you can start hiring people and you can start programs. So a PCN is kind of like a network of those clinics. So in Edmonton, I believe, if I can think off the top of my head, I think it's 5 big ones we have. But I worked in the Edmonton Oliver PCN, and what program they chose to focus on was something called the hospital discharge program. So a lot of the times when someone comes out of the hospital, no one really realizes it, but the communication between the hospital and the family physician clinic isn't the best. Even though we have a lot of technology, even though you think everything's faxed, it's not the greatest because notes get lost, notes don't get transcribed properly. So what I would do is I'd be kind of that piece to connect the two. So I'd be the one, once a patient gets discharged, I'd be the one following up with the patient and then calling the hospital regarding any medications, clarifying things, making sure, why did you start this? Are you sure you needed to start this, or should we maybe stop it? And then doing all those actions and bringing that back to the family physician. We'd have a conversation on what things we would keep, stop, continue, and then kind of go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And I think that missing piece, like you talked about, is really important, especially when patients who might be falling through the system after receiving their care at a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this really important work that you did with the PCN, and obviously working together with other healthcare providers like physicians and
Mm-hmm.
nurses also helps give a more holistic care for the patient.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Excellent. So after your experience at the PCN, could you talk about where that led you next?
So after the PCN, so during my time at the PCN, I met a physician. His name was Dr. Mike Allan. He currently runs a lot of our group and a lot of the we call them CPD programs. So that's continuing professional development. So those are things like a podcast, Best Science podcast, tools for practice. So he did a lot of those things, but he also had a clinic on the side, and I was responsible for one of his clinics. So got to meet him, and then over that kind of relationship, a position came on with the team, with the PR team, and he decided we got some money. He decided to hire 2 people, one a nurse, and then the other a pharmacist. So he hired myself to kind of help expand the group, because it takes a lot of work to do a lot of these programs, and when you start getting more leverage, or you start getting a bigger audience, people kind of want more, and you see more manpower essentially, and that's kind of where he was at. He's kind of in this expansion. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know that he's a really big name here on campus as well, with particularly developing guidelines like the one recently that was just published with the cannabis guidelines. Could you tell us a little bit more about that project, as I'm sure a lot of our listeners are really interested in that subject as well?
Yeah, so I guess a little bit about guidelines in itself. So guidelines are a complicated topic, because I think we use guidelines to help guide us, because we're not sure what to do in certain situations. So the first guideline the group did, and this is before I came on, was a lipid guideline. And at the time, that guideline came out when there was a lot of controversy with how you treat lipids. Some people believe you target LDL levels, as some listeners might remember, or still do to this day, and that's okay. And then there's another approach in that you don't necessarily target LDL, but because the evidence more so relies on the fact they're on a certain medication, not what their LDL was. So their set of guidelines, the peer set of guidelines, focused on just starting the statin, or cholesterol lowering drug, namely a statin, and kind of leaving it at that. Rather than checking LDLs every year, you kind of start them on something based on the risk factors, and you kind of just monitor afterwards without needing to follow the LDL. And got a lot of controversy, but a lot of primary care practitioners like that approach, because I don't know if people know this, but family physicians, their day is pretty strapped, because in between seeing people all day, they have to write notes, look at lab work, order lab work, take phone calls, and whatnot. And essentially, for them to follow an LDL on basically almost everybody on their panel sometimes, it's hard to do, and you'll pick up things that you don't want to pick up sometimes, and not necessarily good things. One example is if a lab result is found above the normal range, is that relevant or not? It's hard, right? You got to kind of sit and think about it, but the patients kind of worry about it when you tell them, because you kind of have to.
Absolutely.
And sometimes that leads to more negative things than if they just didn't know about it at all.
Yeah,
right.
Freak out a little bit with just seeing something that might not be such a huge clinical impact.
Yep.
But just because the numbers don't seem right to them, it might cause some panic, I can imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the reason why these guidelines even started is because a lot of the guidelines are made by specialists, and if listeners kind of know, so a specialist setting is much different than a primary care setting, compared to even a community pharmacy, in that specialists have the resources generally. It's a specialized clinic. All they see is just one type of patient, but in real life, in a community setting, you see all types. So the specialists, when they tell what primary care practitioners what they should do, it's kind of funny, right? In that they don't know how their life or their work is in that setting, yet they're telling them how they should manage their patients. So there's kind of a controversy then, and that's kind of where the guidelines came up. And with the cannabinoids guideline, the cannabis guidelines, that's kind of another thing. It came from the idea that a lot of pain specialists were, maybe recommending these things and starting these things, and telling family physicians that they should do it too. And there's not a lot of information out there on what to do. So what else could you do, right? You likely just listen to the specialist or to what you currently know. So the guidelines kind of formed from that, and helped fill in a lot of the gaps that hopefully a lot of people were asking and want to know about.
Yeah, and even working in a community setting, I can kind of relate to some of those challenges as well. Having a pharmacist being asked a lot about, whether I should take this, this one that was a direct-to-consumer product, or something that didn't have a lot of evidence to support it. And there was a lot of confusion as well, even in the clinic where I had worked.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear that, now we have something that practitioners can potentially rely on to make those decisions. So I guess in follow-up to that, do you know what in terms of after your group has published those guidelines, what was the reception to those to the guidelines, and what's the usability feedback, I suppose, with those guidelines?
Yeah, there's generally great feedback. So for those so what happens after a guideline kind of comes out is you go on a lot of you speak at a lot of conferences about the guideline, and you speak a lot about the topic to kind of get the message out there. And like a lot of the comments at those meetings were that the guidelines were helpful, helped fill in gaps. But there's the other side, the negative side. There's always a not a negative per se, but a critical side. And those people were kind of saying, "Oh, I'd rather prescribe marijuana than opioids," right? Or things like the costs on the system, or you kind of find, I'm trying to think the way to describe it, but the other side, that there's physicians who don't want to prescribe marijuana at all. It doesn't matter what you tell me or what not, right? So that's necessarily not a good thing either, right? Because I think at the end of the day, it's really up to the patient. Maybe you present them the options as long as they're informed. You should kind of work with the patient to see what they want. But a lot of the reception was kind of both, like those two things, like one prescribing marijuana because they don't want to prescribe opioids, and the other one never wanting to prescribe marijuana. That was kind of the reception we got. Regardless of the guideline, I think it filled in a lot of those gaps. People were very happy about it, but it just led to more questions. A lot of questions we don't have answers to because there's not a lot of evidence on it. Currently, the big topic right now, we kind of just did a couple interviews on CBD. CBD cannabidiol is, for those of you who don't know, it's one of the components of the marijuana, one of the chemicals of the marijuana plant. Generally, the two components that get ingested and lead to an effect is THC and CBD, right? Cannabidiol and the CBD components.
There's usually like a ratio between the two, and it's up to the physician, or I guess the patient, to kind of work with the physician to decide what that optimal ratio of the CBD and THC is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the questions right now is that people are starting to find out that THC, as in our guideline, leads to a lot of side effects. THC and CBD lead to a lot of side effects, and some of the comments we got was if you just use CBD, you're not going to get any of the side effects, but you're going to get the benefits. And that's currently what's going on right now in a lot of the media. So people are starting to use CBD oils. CBD creams are very popular in the specialist setting. And kind of the background on that, there's just no evidence on any of those things. Currently, the only thing that there is evidence on is CBD for certain treatment-resistant seizure disorders, and that's where the evidence lies, not necessarily pain or a reduction in side effects.
So thank you for sharing a lot about the guidelines with us. I think a lot of practitioners will find that piece very useful for going forward. I'm curious now, just speaking more from your personal story. What does it look like on a day in the life of Joey? Could you describe to us what your work life, and maybe a little bit about what your maybe projects and things that you're kind of pursuing right now?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So day to day, it's in the research world, it's a little bit different in that. To speak kind of broadly, in the research world, you get usually 2 or 3 big projects. And within those projects, there's a lot of things that you're kind of a part of. So a day-to-day is kind of Trying to think. So I get to work, right? I have an office space at the university here, and usually you have to check emails. Like emails in the research life, emails is a big part of your life, and a lot of those emails are kind of a lot of the keeping up to date. So you're looking at what articles came out this last week. New England Journal just came out today, actually, right? What's on the table of contents? So you're just kind of quickly scrolling through those things, and then once you kind of get a sense of whether there's anything important or not, what I kind of realized is when I got into this job, there's a lot of information. You just need to know how to filter what's important. So once you kind of get that out of the way, you kind of start working on a project. So for an example. One example is we're currently working on another guideline, an opioid use disorder guideline, and what's involved with that is something called a systematic review. It's not the most exciting thing to describe, but it just involves a lot of searching through the literature, searching through a lot of articles, and then from those articles you take a lot of the numbers.
Right.
And to be honest, it's really dry, a lot of that part. And what I realize is that every job has pros and cons. That's kind of the least fun part of research, is those dry bits. So you're looking through the literature, extracting data is what they call it.
Really like detail oriented.
Exactly.
Your expertise have to pick out the right parts. And
Yeah, or you're actually supposed to pick out everything, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah, you actually pick out everything because you want to miss anything. And the more exciting parts, sorry, so this is not a day-to-day, but this is more so like a week, or maybe a month, actually. This happens over like a month. You go from data extraction, which could take a couple of days to a week, and then once you get all your numbers, you sit down with everybody else on the team, and you kind of put them kind of on a screen, and you kind of like look through all the numbers, and you kind of see what makes sense. That's kind of why you need everything. And then you kind of see, is there a certain message coming out from the numbers? Kind of one interesting thing I think I can talk to you guys about is based on our recent literature review. Like when we sat down with all the numbers, we actually found out in regards to prescribing for opioid use disorder.
Yes.
People like Suboxone right now. People are pushing Suboxone, but when you actually look at the evidence and lay it all out, methadone actually has better retention numbers than Suboxone, but people are pushing Suboxone. And it's funny because I think it's just one of those things where it comes down to a lot more factors than just the numbers and the evidence. But that's kind of a little insight on kind of what happens on a day-to-day. To be honest, it's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of multitasking. You'd be data extracting or looking through the literature for maybe the morning, and once you kind of get bored of it, you kind of switch gears, and then you start writing up like an evidence summary for another project.
Okay.
So in the research world, you have a couple projects because it's really boring to just work on one. So you need a couple things to kind of keep yourself going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And I know that your team works a lot with your physicians, and you also have a registered nurse. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
There was another pharmacist, I believe, that I saw on the team.
Yep.
What's that like? What are the team dynamics like working with like the allied healthcare provider?
Yeah, so I think the peer group's really special in that everybody has the same voice. It doesn't matter who you are or what you are. You just bring in a different, some different insight from one another. So I'm gonna be honest with you. It sounds very like relaxed, but on a day-to-day, the interaction, not everyone's there all the time.
Correct.
That's number one. On the days where we are all there, you'll work on something for an hour, then you'll go grab some coffee together, and then you'll like talk about your I don't know, some funny stories for a while, and then you go do some work, and then you'll kind of jump back in, talk again, get to know, like, see what else they did that day. Like, it's a lot of like relationship building in those conversations. It's kind of like water cooler talk.
Oh, yeah.
For those of you who kind of know that term. And all of those conversations, they seem like fun. They are fun because we kind of laugh and joke about it. But a lot of those lead to stronger conversations when you actually get into a meeting, like a productive meeting,
Right.
which does take a lot of our day. So there's meetings that we'd be sitting in together for, you know, as short as a half an hour to as long as I think 8 hours is what we did the other week. So really depends on what you have to talk about and kind of debate, but you know, kind of small chatting all the time, or when you're there, it helps when things get really
when you're talking about more serious issues,
yeah,
like guidelines,
or even when you start like not agreeing with one another.
Right.
That's when it actually matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. It's great to see like really close-knit team of, you know, with Dr. Mike Allan and yourself and, you know, other healthcare professionals. So yeah, and I think that's really also what, you know, the podcast is also about, which really just tries to bring together healthcare providers. So yeah, I appreciate your, you know, your story about, you know, your typical your team and your working group. So I guess you touched a little bit on, you know, the challenges in your everyday line of work. Could you talk about maybe one particular project that was particularly maybe difficult or challenging for yourself or even for your team?
One particular project. To be honest, when you get into the research, the hardest problems you get is actually dealing with funding. I'm gonna be honest with you. That's been the biggest challenge we all face. Funding is the hardest thing to get, and it's the hardest thing to argue for. Get an example, like many people can probably relate, is I don't want to bring pharmacy into this all the time, but if you want to do something in the community, you know, let's say you wanted to build a new playground, right? You have to get money for that, okay? And then people ask you, okay, I'm going to give you this money, and you'll build a playground, but then, like, what is that playground going to do? Okay, so is it going to make my kids happier? Is that going to make the kids in this community happier? Is it going to make kids in another? Yeah, great. So the impact is what people care about, and that's why they provide you money. And it's the hardest thing in research to show impact.
Right, and to show that, you know, there's value created based on, you know, the guidelines, and I think part of it is also being able to measure those outcomes. So maybe hard to even pinpoint a particular number or a statistic related to it.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest with you, you know, I think if we asked each other, you know, what is something you'd measure, you probably say a bunch of things, right? And I could say, you know, those are good ones, but can you measure those? And a lot of the times it's no. Even if you want to ask yourself, when you drank this cup of coffee today, you know, how much did that affect the landfill?
Yeah. Right?
Because that's something we care about. It's important to the world, but to track that, it's almost impossible because of all the different factors. And it's like that in research. There's things I could list off things to measure, but it's really hard to even have the resources to find that answer and measure that impact. Yep.
Absolutely. So I think, yeah, and even to, you know, to have to be able to put it into writing and then submit it to organization must be a lot of work to gather that information and be able to piece it together for a different audience that might not be in research.
Yeah, actually, to be honest, when you submit these proposals, the people who see them, they do know the literature. Yeah, it's actually the issue is if you had a bunch of money, you have in your own mind what you want to do with that money. And if you come up to me with a proposal and it's not what I want, I'm not going to give you the money. It doesn't matter how much you spin it. So it's hard. You actually have to modify what you have to do to fit what people want. And sometimes it's things you don't agree with. And that's the hard part. And in research, you have to kind of concede to certain things, especially when you're getting big pots of money. Yeah, and you might not agree with it. Yeah.
No, I think with any, I guess, research as well, with my summer position as well last year, I was able to be part of a research team with Dr. Mikowski here on campus. Yeah. And similarly, I think funding was also a tremendous issue for us. You know, trying to reach out to different organizations and seeing which ones would be receptive. So. Yeah, I think in any healthcare setting, you know, whether you're in pharmacy or whether you're in you know, in the hospital, the funding is really limited in that regard.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah.
So I guess moving to a more like a lighter topic.
Yeah, for sure.
We're talking a lot about, the different challenges that you're facing. What are ways that you're able to overcome some of those challenges, I guess. What do you feel like are the traits that kind of make you a good fit for your job?
So I'll speak to more so not the research side, but so let's say the presentation side of things. Presenters, so researchers, not to speak negatively, but presentations sometimes not a strong suit for a lot of presenters. And for myself, one of the traits that I was good at was public speaking, even though it's still nerve-wracking to me, to be honest. But a big challenge at the beginning of this job was, you have to go in front of all these doctors and you have to give a message, and you have to be able to defend it if someone disagrees. And when you first start this, I don't know if you guys feel it, but if someone, let's say in a higher position, told you something, you generally want to believe them because you don't know anything. You assume they know things.
More experience. And
exactly. So you assume they know it. But
right.
the big challenge at the beginning was getting the confidence to say no, actually, I looked through everything and you're actually wrong, even though you might have seen this a million times. So that's actually really hard to do. But it comes with practice. And luckily, I think Allan is really smart in that how he hires people. He looks for people who are lighthearted, who don't take things too seriously, because you need that when you're facing a situation when someone's really angry at you, and you can kind of back away and you don't take that home and you don't think it's a big deal. You kind of need those people, and those are the traits. I'm more laid back. I'm more, I'd say, I don't really stress about things because, or it's not that I don't stress about things. It's more so my stress doesn't show in my day-to-day. It shows more so maybe when I'm sleeping, or I've learned how to deal with a lot of those stresses. So I was good at that, and that's what made this job a lot easier.
Yeah, and it's great to hear about how professionals in every stage of their career and how they kind of cope with different things that they're bombarded with on a day-to-day basis. So could you elaborate a bit more about maybe supports that you had that maybe help you overcome some of the stressors that you mentioned previously?
Right. I mean, everyone will say friends, family, partner, girlfriend kind of thing. Those are pretty standard. I guess some more so the atypical ones, I think. Thinking about now, I'm kind of a person, I don't know if it's a good thing, that buries my stress. And one way it comes out, which is a bad thing, is you wake up. I don't know if you've had this dream where you wake up, you think you missed an exam. I kind of learned actually that's because you buried your stress, and that's how it's coming out. Another one is you can't sleep, right? A lot of people can't sleep when they're too stressed. So that kind of happens too. So for me, how I deal with it is the simple things. So it's weird. You go take a walk in the mall because Edmonton is pretty cold, and or you just go exercise. I think working out, keeping active is a good way to relieve the stress. I like to say video games, but at the same time, video games make you more stressed, I think. So I don't know if that'd be a good thing, but sometimes you just need that, right? You just need that time alone.
Yeah.
And as weird as it might sound, sometimes I just sit in the car, nothing's on, and I just sit there for 5 minutes just to let everything pass.
Yeah.
And stress is normal. When it becomes abnormal, I think that's when people have to start dialing back. When we're younger, we think that we can do everything, so we do it. And that's fine. What's hard is you start adding on things. So work, you get married or you have kids, and you don't want to leave what you currently are doing. And what you end up doing is you overload yourself, and people stay at that for a long time, and they get to a point where you can't maybe reverse anything, and you can't do everything to the best of your ability as you get older, and things are not going the way you want it to be. So I think just keeping tabs on what you're currently doing is always important, and never overload yourself.
Yeah, that's really good advice for our listeners, regardless of whether they're a student or a healthcare provider. As we know, there's definitely a very high rate of burnout within, the population with healthcare professionals. So it's really good advice that sometimes, we just need to sit back and kind of reflect on what we are committing ourselves or maybe overcommitting ourselves to.
Definitely.
So I think that's really important. So in terms of moving ahead with your career, could you share with the listeners, maybe what your next steps are, or what's kind of getting you going?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I recently joined the National College of Family Physicians. So we want to take what we're doing on a more national basis. So spreading the message across Canada rather than just Alberta. A lot of the people think our group focuses on Alberta, but we do that because that's where our funding comes from. And that's where we're located. So we kind of want to spread the message more. So by working with this national college, hopefully we can get more of our evidence, information, and tools out to more of the public. In addition to that, I think, so this peer group, not a lot of people know about peer, and a part of it is because of marketing. So currently we're trying to undergo this new marketing strategy on how do you get your brand out there. And it's funny because in the research world, the reason why there's so many groups is because you don't want anyone else to take your work. So people create groups, and you keep that property within the group. The group can change by who is there, but the name is still there. It'll still stick. So we're trying to get our brand across right now, and it's really hard because people know about us, people know about Mike Allan, people know about the podcast or Tools for Practice, but no one knows about the group, who's behind it. Yeah.
Seems like you guys are working really hard behind the scenes, and we kind of want to know a bit more about like the personalities behind the team, just as we are kind of doing today.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and it's hard because I think we're right now. If you go to conferences, if you say, "Are you part of Mike Allan's group?" they would know who you're talking about. And then peer hasn't yet stuck, and it's one of those things where it is a business thing. We're not good with business and marketing, and we have to go out there and figure out how do you market yourself. And it's kind of the current struggle we're going through, and probably the next steps we're going to be doing. Beyond that, it's hard. I think my funding's only good for 3 years, and whether I get more funding or not is going to depend on what I do in these next 3 years. So I couldn't tell listeners where I'm going to be in 5 years. Let alone 4 years, or even 3 years, because it's going to be based on the reception of what we do in these next 3 years that will drive the years later.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. There is a lot of change in the industry, and with with research being very broad-based, and it's hard to kind of know exactly where your path will lead you. So I think there is a lot of potential in the field, especially where you're working, and just making that bridge between the academic knowledge and how do we apply that in everyday practice.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I guess if you had to share one piece of advice for our listeners, life advice, it could be career related or even just broader personal type advice, what would that piece of advice be?
So I'll give two things. The first one is it's very hard for us to save nowadays. My number one life advice, so you're not stressing when you're retiring, is put away at least 10% of your money. Okay, and that's just general advice. But in terms of career advice, so I was always struggling, even when I graduated, on where I was going to be in 10 years. You won't feel it yet because you're not graduated, but when you graduate and you worked a year, you're going to ask yourself the question, like, is this it to life? That's what they actually call a quarter life crisis. And you're going to have a midlife crisis as well, right? That's just very normal to have that, actually, and there's literature behind it. Anyways, but you're gonna ask that question, is this all there is to life? And you're gonna keep asking yourself that question, and you're gonna ask yourself, okay, I want to do more school because I think I can be better. So you do more school, and then once you finish the school, you're gonna ask yourself the same question. And that's what I kind of realized after I did my PharmD. I asked the exact same question I did before I went to the PharmD. Is this it? Is this all there is to life? And then I'm like, okay, do I do more school? Or, what do I do? My advice actually is you need to figure out what path you want to take. Someone kind of told me the best way to figure out where you want to be later on in life is to ask yourself, do you want to be the person who deals, who wants to make an impact on a one-on-one basis, right? Do you want to be affecting change on a patient level? Or do you want to be affecting change on a 1 to 100 level? Do you want to be more the manager, administrator, government, the influencer, right? Some people really like the one-on-one. That makes them happy. And some people like more spread. And you got to pick which boat. It's really hard. But if you pick one boat, you'll be really satisfied with what you do in life. Yeah.
So in that regard, it's, if we're selecting with one path, we should kind of commit to it and, own up to that decision, rather than kind of be a jack of all trades, if you will, and try to do too much at once. Is that fair to say? Yeah,
exactly. So students right now, I don't know if you realize, but they're coming out so soon. Many people have a PharmD. I was lucky in that there was not so many PharmDs when I graduated, but more PharmDs will be coming out, and when the entry-level PharmD comes out, even more PharmDs will be coming out. So a lot of these people, they have good education. How do you separate yourself? And the only way to separate yourself is you become really good at something, one thing. You can't be good at everything. We don't have the time to do that. So just pick one thing, be really good at it, and you'll likely get a career or some sort of job because of that. And that's kind of the advice I would give. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joey, for your time today. I think you shared a lot with us about your personal experiences and a lot of wisdom, I think, for our listeners, regardless of where they are in life. So really great to hear the direction that you're headed, and congratulations with being part of on a national level with your project.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a good opportunity, and hopefully listeners kind of take away helpful things from this talk. Thanks.